Broken Money by Lyn Alden and some of the earlier chapters of that book. So what was it about that you wanted to discuss with me?
Well, I've spent a lot of time trying to orange pill friends and family and just people generally. And I have settled on that book as I think the best one to hand over to somebody to, it doesn't speak about Bitcoin very much, but it speaks a lot about what money is. And I remember the first chapter just really, really sticking with me. And she explained that part of what makes humans unique from other animals is our ability to cooperate at scale. And that's through things like language and money in the same way. If we think back to maybe a dumb example, if you're alone on an island by yourself, there's no need for money. You have nobody to trade with, you have nobody to coordinate with. And if maybe you're joined by a second person, maybe you guys just keep like a mental ledger of, this morning I got up and went fishing for food. Maybe tomorrow you go do that for me. And, that mental ledger might work with just a couple people. And then if you scale that up to like 100 people, maybe you want to start writing down, which favors are owed to who. Like, I did this for you, you owe me this. And the book even mentions that the earliest form of writing that we have on record was from Mesopotamia. And it was a clay tablet from about 5,000 years ago that was just a ledger of X person owes one cow to Y person. And, it even makes you think that maybe we started writing things down because we needed a form of money at the time. So money almost predates writing. And well, if we keep going with our example here, with 100 people, maybe that written ledger is a fine way of keeping track of who owes, what to whom. But as soon as we start interacting with people that we don't know and don't trust, maybe we start encountering neighboring tribes or, other civilizations completely. We needed a way to trade with them when we didn't trust them, we didn't know them, and we may never see them again. And what the book goes into is that the initial attempt at trading with them was barter. Maybe I have extra spears, you have extra furs. And as long as that, what's called the double coincidence of wants is satisfied, which means that we both coincidentally want what the other person has an excess of, then we can trade, no problem. But as soon as that double coincidence of wants isn't satisfied, so let's say I go to trade with somebody else and they already have enough spears, then the trades are going to fail. And they're going to fail a lot more than they're going to succeed. So basically, we can scale trade within small groups by just keeping a mental ledger, writing things down. But as soon as we start dealing with people that we don't know and don't trust, this problem of barter comes into play, where it's difficult to complete trades with one another. And Lyn Alden speaks about one of the earliest forms of money being shells. And people started collecting shells and using them in trade for items like spears. And a question that really struck me was basically, how could a shell have more value than something like a spear or something like food? You can eat food, you need food to eat. A spear, you can actually do something with it. You can hunt, and these things provide actual utility. And what she explained so brilliantly is that past a certain point, more spears aren't helpful. If we have 100 people in our group, we don't need 1,000 spears. They just become a burden at that point. They're too much to carry around. They're almost a negative at that point. And food is similar. There's no refrigeration at this time. So how much food do you really need? Well, as much as you need before it's going to spoil. So you don't need a year's worth of food because it's rotting. So people started collecting shells, and these specific shells, they were only found in deep parts of the ocean. So there was some effort involved in diving down and polishing them and making them look pretty. And people started using these shells as one side of every trade. We have these oral or mental ledgers and then written ledgers. The shells are really just a ledger, and the ledger is updated by physical possession of the shell. So those who hold the shells are the ones that control the ledger. And each of those shells can basically be viewed as like a little stored up favor. Like initially with just the two people on the island, you owed me one. And each of those shells basically represents like, hey, you owe me one. And why it's a question that I had initially was why something like shells And there's an entire study called Austrian economics, of course, which you're very familiar with, which basically breaks down why something becomes money. And what people were looking for was just the most sellable object, the thing that everybody else wanted, the easiest item to sell. And shells happened to be very sellable because they were very durable. They weren't going to rot like the food. They were very portable in that you could sew them into your clothes. You could wear them as a necklace or as jewelry. And they were, scarce, portable, durable. And like I referenced earlier, past a certain point, more food, more spears becomes an actual burden for you because you have no use for it. So these shells basically represented a way of storing up like a little financial battery, basically. It was like this little favor that you could store, and you didn't need to cash it in for something that you needed right away. You could store it into the future, and you could trade it for something whenever you needed something. It's like, okay, I don't need food today, but maybe in 1 month, I can take these little shells and trade them for that. So the big idea here being that money is really just a ledger. Initially just an oral ledger, then we start writing stuff down, and then we start trading these little physical objects like, gold, shells, things like this that have certain properties, and it helps us scale trade with people that we don't know, don't trust, and may never see again. And that's like, it's incredibly useful, of course. It's what lets us specialize at things, which is, if you look around you, basically all of the stuff in your apartment is because we have been able to, the division of labor, really, we're able to specialize at things. And, like tonight, I'm gonna work on our podcast a little bit, and I can't go down to the store and say, hey, listen, I just did some work on a podcast. Can I have some food? It's like, they don't care. I do some work for you. You give me money. I take the money and trade it for the food that I want, and they can take the money and trade it for whatever else that they may need in the future. So money, I don't know the store owner here. I don't trust him. He doesn't trust me, but we're able to trade and coordinate with one another because of this thing called money, it's just fascinating to me, really.
Just to really hammer that, like the Bitcoin rabbit hole is so compelling. It shouldn't really be called the Bitcoin rabbit hole. It should be called the money rabbit hole. And it's like, oh, I'm learning about what money actually is for the first time. And by going through the history of money, it helps to just really make it so clear. It's like, oh, it's this thing that sits in between everything else that kind of greases the wheels of trade.